In Answer to Your Call by Phyllis Eisenstein. Originally published in the January 1978 issue of the Magazine of Fantasy and Science Fiction, republished in two more magazines, the May 1978 issue of a French one called Fiction, and the July 1978 issue of a Japanese one called SF. Then, in two anthologies, a German one in 1981 and another called Fantastic Chicago in 1991. Read by Darrell T. Smith II for my channel, Quasar Spectra. In Answer to Your Call. Sam Haskell woke with a numb right hand and a taste of garbage in his mouth. When he lifted his head, pain stabbed between his shoulder blades, and his arm began to ache where the metal-rimmed keys of the ancient L.C. Smith had marked it deeply. As he leaned back, his chair made a sound like the feeling in his joints. He reached for the bottle, then blurrily realized it was empty. Getting too old for this kind of crap, he thought. Deadline or no deadline. A glance at the pages stacked beside the typewriter showed "The End" scrawled prominently on the uppermost sheet. He recalled putting his head down for just a moment to let the relief of completion wash over him. By his watch, that was 5 hours ago. He had missed the morning mail pickup. The next was early in the evening. His editor's March issue could wait that long. He scraped the chair back, intending to fall across the bed for another dose of oblivion. A young woman sat on the bed, a young woman dressed all in black, suede boots, close-fitting slacks, elaborately tooled belt, and silky turtleneck pullover. Not an unusual costume for the local university community, though of finer quality than average. She had one knee bent, her hands clasped about it, and she was watching him with a faint smile. 5 hours earlier, he had been alone in his one-room apartment. Abruptly wide awake, he glanced over his shoulders, left and right, in search of some other intruder. He saw none. The door was double-bolted, as usual. He leaped to his feet, toppling the chair as he lunged for the dresser. The second drawer almost came out in his hands when he wrenched it open. Under a pile of socks, he found the revolver, loaded, waiting, the metal cold to his touch. He clutched it with shaking fingers. He had never aimed it at another human being. "Who are you?" he croaked, the words distorted by the dryness of his mouth. "How the hell did you get in here?" She hadn't moved, had only watched him calmly, her head cocked to one side. "This is a rather peculiar welcome," she murmured. "I asked you a question, lady." Shrugging, she said, "You called me, and I came." "I didn't call anyone." She rose, and in the shifting contours of muscle limned by her snug clothing, there were neither soft curves nor sharp angles. She moved like a lioness, all fluid steel, and her gaze met his, unblinking, and penetrated to his marrow. "What silly game is this, my dear?" "I'd like to know that too, lady. Stop right where you are." She frowned. "Don't you know me?" "No." "No?" Her puzzlement seemed so genuine that he felt forced to sift his memory for those dark eyes and fine, high-bridged nose, that close-cropped chestnut hair. He came up empty-handed. "I've never seen you before in my life." She stepped toward him again, and only when he raised the gun to chest height did she pause. "I can't believe you've been mind-wiped. Your eyes look all right." "What about my eyes?" he said. "They're still blue. There's no known way in the universe to prevent pigment migration during mind-wipe." He almost smiled at that. "You seem to have read my work." "Your work?" "I've probably used mind-wipe in 6 stories. In that one, too, I think." He nodded toward the manuscript by the typewriter. "Did you read it while I was asleep instead of burglarizing the place?" "I am not a burglar." Then what the hell are you? I am Archmajor Sharon Stewart, late of Her Majesty's 5th Commando Brigade, cashiered at the end of the Zyron War, and currently serving Lord Alarion as a mercenary. Haskell's lips compressed tightly for a moment. Then he said, "And how did you get into my room?" "I was in Alarion's court, making my final obeisance, and I heard you calling me from far away. I turned and took a step toward your voice, and then I experienced a sensation of utter dislocation. I was passing through a warp in space, and on the other side, I found myself here, with you. You were sleeping, and I decided to wait quietly until you woke." Haskell shook his head ruefully. "What purpose do you think this sham will serve?" "Sham?" "Yes, sham. Surely you don't think for a moment that I'm going to believe that one of my own characters is paying me a social call. I invented Sharon Stewart, and no one knows better than I do that she isn't real." "I am quite real, Mal, quite real." "Mal?" Haskell's eyebrows rose at the sound of that name. "Don't tell me I'm supposed to be Malcolm Sanderson, intrepid adventurer of the spaceways." "Well, who else could you be?" "I am Sam Haskell, writer of Pulp Fiction." Slowly, her gaze slipped downward from his face to the gun in his hand. At her sides, her hands curled into fists. "Who could have done this to you?" she whispered. "Who hates us enough to erase your memory of our life together?" She looked up again, and there was pain in her eyes. "Oh, my dear." "Turn it off, sweetheart. You're a pretty good actress, but I doubt if anyone will ever film my stuff." "Oh, Mal. Mal, this is madness." She scanned the room, as if seeing it for the first time. Her gaze caught briefly at the door and the window. "Are we locked in?" "Only from the inside." "Where is this place?" He sighed in exasperation. "This place is my cheap and somewhat shabby apartment in Hyde Park, a neighborhood on the south side of the city of Chicago in the county of Cook, the state of Illinois, the United States of America, planet Earth, otherwise known as Sol 3, satellite of a very nondescript G-type star. Does that satisfy you, Archmajor Stewart?" "Earth? Fabled Earth? Oh, come on. You remind me of what a hack writer I really am. Is the window transparent?" "It may not be clean, but the last time I checked, you could still see through it." "May I look out?" "You can look, but you'll only see the brick wall next door, and the window is nailed shut." She twitched aside the grimy shade and peered out, contemplating the view for some moments. "How long have you been here?" she asked. "In Hyde Park? All my life. In this apartment, about 5 years." She glanced at him over her shoulder. "You've lived many places, but never Earth." Once again, he shook his head. "I can't figure you out. If you really believe what you're saying, well, then one of us is crazy. On the other hand, if you're just faking all of this to slip out of an attempted robbery charge, all right, the door is over there. I won't try to stop you. I haven't got a damn thing worth stealing except the typewriter, and I'll bet you could do a hell of a lot better than that in some other apartment. If I never see you again, well, that's okay, and I want you to know that I'm really flattered that you're so familiar with my work. Keep on buying it, or stealing it, if that's what you do. Go on, get out of here." He waved toward the door with his empty hand. She stood motionless beside the window. "There must be doctors who can cure you," she said softly. He lowered the gun then, and the muscles of his forearm pulsed raggedly in relief. "Go on. Go out the door. I won't shoot you." She raised her left arm, pushed the sleeve back to reveal a silver bracelet. "You need help. Let me call for the local authorities." "On your two-way wrist radio?" "Something of the sort." "I'd like to see that trick." She fingered the bracelet, which he now saw was covered with a fine pattern of filigree. She frowned and whispered her name like an invocation, and she fingered it again. At last she said, "We must be enclosed in a non-conductant field." "Doesn't work, huh?" She clutched the bracelet-circled wrist with her other hand. "Is this a trap? Is it some sadistic game?" She looked up at the ceiling and shouted, "Is someone watching us this very moment?" Involuntarily, he looked up too, and in that instant of his distraction, she crossed the space that separated them, flung her arms about his waist, and held on as if he were the only hope in a drowning world. "I won't lose you," she cried. He stood awkward in her embrace, the gun dangling from his fingers. Her body was warm against his, her hair soft beside his cheek. For a heartbeat, he could almost imagine that she was truly Sharon come to life, the heroine of 1,000 interstellar adventures, the ideal that he had molded for himself through countless hours of writing for a quarter-cent a word. For a heartbeat, he felt that he must still be sleeping, and then the weight of the gun in his hand reminded him that he was very much awake. "What do you want?" he demanded, but softly, because she was so near his lips. "Nothing more than my Mal," she whispered, and then she pressed her mouth to his. He felt light-headed, kissing her. Too many months had passed since he'd held a woman in his arms, and he could not force himself to break the sweet contact. At last she drew back, but only an inch or two. "I know that kiss," she murmured. The gun scraped her shoulder as he pulled her close, but she didn't seem to notice. Only when they sank to the bed did it leave his hand to lie beside the pillow, an incongruous spectator to their swift, silent coupling. Afterward, as he dozed in her arms, he had an old, familiar dream. He dreamed he wandered in darkness, calling out for help. In the distance, a woman's voice answered, but no matter how fast he walked, and sometimes he seemed to be flying instead, he could not reach her. Finally he glimpsed her, a dim silhouette in the light of 3 crescent moons, but just as he raised his arm to wave a glad greeting, he woke. The woman who called herself Sharon Stewart stretched beside him and then sat up. "Come outside with me, Mal, and show me what sort of place Earth is." He studied the smooth, pale skin of her thigh, stroked it with his fingertips. His anger was gone now, and his exasperation replaced by an amused acquiescence to the game. "You'll find it rather primitive," he said. She began to dress. "For aesthetic reasons? Like a wilderness preserve?" "No, not like that." Before pulling on his own clothes, he sealed his story manuscript into a stamped envelope. He noticed the gun, then, still lying on the bed, and he carefully shut it in the second drawer of the dresser under the pile of socks. Outside, the fall day was windy, and cinders, dandelion seeds, and newspapers swirled about them as they walked. Across the street, a crowd of screaming children played on the steps of the ramshackle synagogue. "Rather a prosaic-looking place," she said, nodding toward the shabby frame buildings to their left, toward the lawns where glass mingled with grass in a twinkling mosaic, toward the potholed street and crumpled sidewalk. "Is this a slum?" "Beginning to be," he muttered. "There are nicer areas." "I see that the locals can only afford ground cars." She indicated the vehicles lining both sides of the thoroughfare. "We call them automobiles," Haskell told her. "Based on the internal combustion engine. Their fuel is gasoline, a petroleum product." "Internal combustion? But you have broadcast power." She pointed toward the nearest rooftop, which sprouted several tall antennas. "Television reception, 2-dimensional entertainment, projected by a cathode ray tube on a glass screen coated with phosphors. Our power, electrical power, comes through cables either above or below ground." Her eyebrows lifted. "When you said primitive, you weren't joking." They reached the corner where the mailbox stood in a patch of weeds. He dropped the envelope in. It's a very dull place compared to Phaedra or Aronnax II. She looked all about her, turning slowly to scrutinize every detail of the block. She looked up into the sky, squinting against the sunlight. Earth, she said, the cradle of civilization. Somehow I expected more. Soaring towers, floating palaces. Something in the distant sky caught her attention, and she shaded her eyes to see it more clearly. A faint drone accompanied the silver bird shape, increasing in volume as the plane grew nearer and passed almost overhead on its low approach to Midway Airport. Is that a propeller-driven aircraft? Her tone was incredulous. It's a pretty standard form of transportation. But it's so inefficient. Well, it's about the best we have, at least commercially. The military has jets, of course. She watched the plane disappear into the west. Surely anti-gravity is cheap enough? Unless there's some absurd law against it. There isn't any anti-gravity. You should import it, then. No, I mean it hasn't been invented yet. Her expression was puzzled. Well, of course it has. It's been around for centuries. It was invented here on Earth. He shook his head. She laughed, hesitantly at first, and then easier, as if she suddenly realized he was being teased. Mal, you and I have both used anti-grav 1,000 times. We even had private belts on Janek's World. I've never been on Janek's World, and there's no such thing as anti-gravity, not in the year 1952. Her whole body stiffened as if she had been given an electric shock. 1952? What system would that be? The one commonly used by Western civilization, Anno Domini? You mean the Christian era? The very same. She raised a hand to her lips. Have we come through a warp in time as well as space? Thousands of parsecs and thousands of years? Haskell leaned against the mailbox. Well, I don't know about you, he said, but I've lived here all my life and haven't ever been more than 50 miles from this city. Mal, you've been light years from this city. No. You've been to Altair, to the core, to the Lesser Magellanic Cloud. You've fought battles that ranged farther than this planet's orbit. I was 4F during the war. You skippered a dreadnought during the war. I meant World War II, the one that happened on Earth a few years ago. I didn't skipper anything and never have. Earth doesn't have spaceships. I hope she will someday, but I'll certainly never command one of them. I just write about that stuff. Mal, and I'm not Mal. Really, I'm not. I wish I were. I'm sorry, but I think the game is over. Her head bent slowly as if under a heavy weight, and, eyes staring down at the buckled sidewalk beneath her feet, she rubbed stiff fingers against the back of her neck. She looked bewildered. She looked like she needed comfort, and Haskell wanted to reach out to her, take her in his arms, hold her close and tell her it didn't matter. None of it mattered. But he did nothing because now he had the chilling feeling that he had misjudged her all along, that it hadn't been a game at all, but a delusion, a well-structured delusion based on the product he had spent his life creating. Finally, she looked up at him. Sam, she said, Sam, show me, what did you call it, Hyde Park? He smiled and took her hand. There are indeed a few things to see. They walked. They passed away from the modest shabbiness of frame dwellings and moved on toward the faded splendor of the 20s, huge, rambling old buildings badly in need of renovation. They nosed into dark, cramped bookstores and narrow neighborhood bakeries. They watched the local commuter train pull into the 57th Street station, then ducked under the trestle and headed for the Museum of Science and Industry. In the great domed hall, where vintage mono and biplanes hung by steel wires from the ceiling, they paused. Masses of school children eddied by them, chattering and giggling, and, when they thought their teachers weren't looking, sliding on the highly polished floor. The souvenir counter was doing its usual land office business in miniature ceramics, keychains, ashtrays, and pamphlets bearing the museum's imprint. "I come here often," Haskell said. "Sometimes for inspiration, sometimes just for fun." In the few hours before closing time, he could only show her the highlights of the museum: the steel exhibit, the telephones, the educational television studio, the electricity demonstration. She asked few questions but looked and listened everywhere. The technology of Earth opened up before her, and she frowned much. On the way out, they stopped at the huge cylindrical periodic table of elements. Here, every element had its own niche, lit by a small fluorescent tube, marked with the name and atomic weight and number. The radioactives alone were not represented by ore samples, bottles of gas, or commercial products. She traced the bottom row to the last entry, element 98, californium, and she stood there long, fingering the glass that separated her from the empty niche. They were the last to leave, and the guards closed the museum doors behind them. From the broad marble steps they watched the sun sink among the low buildings to the west, and then they went down to the lake shore to sit on the embankment and see the stars come out. "Sam," she said, "what is it exactly that you write about?" He smiled. "You seem to know that as well as I do." "You write about Mal and me, about the future." "It's not much of a living, but yes, that's what I do. I write science fiction." She stared out across the dark water at the empty horizon. "Not fiction, Sam. Mal and I are real. The Zyron War was real. Will be real." She turned to him, her face dim in the glow of the newly kindled streetlights behind her. "Sam, you've tapped the future somehow. Through rapport with Mal, I think. He is you, Sam, and you are him. I can't tell the two of you apart." "I've always thought of him as a vast improvement on myself." "No, you look alike. You talk alike, more so than identical twins. The odds against genetic duplication, aside from twinning, are astronomical, but the number of people who have lived throughout history is also astronomical. That one chance in a quintillion for a genetic repeat could have happened by now, by my now. It has happened, Sam. You're in rapport with Mal, transcribing his experiences. Somehow that rapport has opened a gate between your time and mine, and I've come through at your call. There is no other possible explanation." Haskell rubbed at his chin with 2 fingers. "If I opened a gate via rapport with Mal, why didn't he come through it? Obviously because you wanted me." He looked away from her then, but her face was clear in his mind's eye, and the memory of her flesh was in his hands. "Maybe I did, but even identical twins don't have the kind of rapport you're talking about." "Of course they do. That's a well-known fact." "Not in my day, it isn't." "Well, this is a fairly primitive day, isn't it?" He closed his eyes. He didn't know what to think. Was she mad, or was the truth as wild as any of his stories? A cool wind began to blow from the lake, and it roused him from his reverie. The sky was quite dark, the brightest stars outshining the glow of city lights. "It's getting late. We'd better go." "The night is lovely." "It's not a good idea to be here after dark." She shrugged. "There are 2 of us. We could handle anything that came up. I don't feel quite as confident about that as you do." She touched his hand lightly. "All right, we'll go back to your apartment and relax for a while. Then you can send me back." "Send you back?" "You brought me here. You can send me back." He gripped her hand tightly. I suppose so. He stood, pulled her to her feet. I don't really know how I'm going to do it. She stepped close to kiss his cheek, and his arms slipped about her waist, fitting there as if she had been molded for him. We'll puzzle it out, Sam. I have to go, you know. I have responsibilities waiting for me, and Mal. And Mal, he murmured. Arm in arm, they ambled across the beach. Briefly, he considered steering her toward Billings Hospital, toward the kind and experienced psychiatrists who would probably clap her in a room with barred windows. But he could not help thinking of himself, mysteriously transported to the 17th century, locked in a madhouse. Would he ever be able to talk his way out? She had no purse, no identification of any kind, but what if her clothing were made of an unknown fabric? What if the silvery bracelet were an undiscovered alloy? The skeptic in him believed she was mad. The dreamer wanted to believe that she was Sharon. They walked toward his apartment. They passed dark alleys, shadowy doorways, vacant buildings, the inky mystery beneath the railroad trestle. She seemed drawn to those places, lingering in their silence, while he wanted to hurry from streetlight to streetlight. Vandals had been busy smashing the cream-colored globes in recent days. Every third or fourth light was out. It seemed to Haskell that their route darkened progressively, try as he might to pick a well-lit path. Nor were there any other pedestrians abroad, though the hour was not particularly late. They were still some blocks from his apartment when he heard the footsteps. She looked back over her left shoulder. "Someone is following us," she murmured. He stepped up their pace, fairly dragging her along by one arm. "You don't have to rush, Sam. It's even odds." "No, thanks," he said, breathing too hard and too fast. "Come on." He glanced back, trying to be casual about it. He saw two shadowy forms, tall, slender, long-legged, about 20 yards back. "We can take them." "No." "Sam, are you afraid?" "Damn right." His breath raked his throat like talons, and the muscles in his legs screamed at the stiff motion he was forcing from them. "I can handle them both, Sam. You know that." "No!" She broke away from him. "I won't run," she said, and she turned to face the strangers. He skittered to a halt a dozen feet beyond her and froze there, watching the confrontation over one shoulder. The scene was dark and full of tangled shadows. She stood easy, hands on hips, as they approached, and then they reached for her, or she for them. Bodies swooped and tumbled in the dimness. Grunts and growls and the thick crunch of pummeled flesh and bone sounded in the melee. A shadow leaped from the fray, and before Haskell could react, it was upon him, bearing him down to the ground, hands hard upon his face. He struggled, clawed at coarse fabric, pushed, and then his assailant was gone, and only the rasp of his own ragged breathing remained loud upon the night air. The woman who called herself Sharon helped him up. "Are you all right?" Shakily, he dusted himself off. His knee throbbed where it had struck the sidewalk in his fall, but otherwise he was whole. Two men lay limp on the grass near his feet. He stared down at them. "Are they dead? Does it matter?" He looked at her face, saw the glitter of her eyes, reflections of a distant streetlight. He saw that it didn't matter to her. He caught her arm. "If they're dead, we have to call the police." She stirred one body with her foot, then the other. Both groaned. "They're alive, but they won't feel very well for the next few days. Shall we go?" Yes, that's a good idea." He managed to walk away without glancing back more than 3 times. The men never moved, and at last, from the other end of the block, they seemed to have merged with the shadows and disappeared completely. His hands were trembling when they reached his apartment, and he had some trouble inserting the key into the lock. Inside, he headed straight for the pantry, and on the back of a high shelf he found a dusty bottle with a little whiskey in the bottom. He finished it. He felt a little better with that warmth in his stomach. She sat on the table next to the typewriter. Are there many of that sort on the streets of Earth? Too many, he said. I presume you didn't know them, that there was no personal vendetta involved? He shook his head. They intended robbery and perhaps rape? You've got the idea. He sat down in his chair, close to her knees. You handled it very well. I'm trained for that. Perhaps more people on Earth should be trained for it. Then the darkness would not be so dangerous. Yes, they should. She reached down and touched his cheek with one hand. Dear Sam, I can't stay any longer. She bent to kiss his forehead. It's been strange and wonderful meeting you, but I have a lover waiting for me and a vow to Lord Alarion. You must send me back. He covered her warm hand with his own. I don't know how. Close your eyes, Sam. Think of Mal and me and our lives in the far future. Think of the gate that only you can open between your time and ours. You can do it, Sam. He closed his eyes, and he thought of many things, of the nearness of her body, of the taste of cheap whiskey in his mouth, of the shabby, lonely room that would be left to him when she was gone, and at last he thought of Mal, waiting somewhere far away, waiting and perhaps calling for her, just as Sam Haskell had called. He felt pity for Mal then, and in that moment of pity he willed the gate to be open, willed her to be gone through it. He felt her hands withdraw from him. He held his breath. The moment passed. He opened his eyes, and she was still there. I can't do it, he said. Of course you can, Sam. Try again. Relax and try again. He shook his head. I tried. I really tried. If there were a gate, it would have opened then, but there isn't. There is. There is no gate, no Mal, no Sharon. Don't you understand now? It's all a delusion. You're a beautiful woman and a highly skilled fighter, but that doesn't make you Sharon. You need help. You need a doctor's help. She bent close to him again. There is a gate, Sam. Think of Mal, waiting, wondering what has happened to me. Think of Lord Alarion's many-spired palace, the vast ballroom with its transparent floor and gem-encrusted hangings, the golden staircase and diamond doors. Her voice was smooth and coaxing, almost a lullaby. I'm sorry. Whatever your name is, I'm sorry. She slipped off the table and dropped to her knees before him. Dear Sam, people are depending on me. I can't betray them. Even a mercenary has some honor. He stroked her dark hair with both hands. I'll help you. I won't leave you. We'll work on this together. We'll bring you out of it. Soon you'll forget all about Lord Alarion and Mal. Sam, I couldn't stay in this pathetic backwater of space and time. You have no ships, no hyperdrive. I'd never see the stars again as they really are. The galaxy, Sam, from the Lesser Magellanic Cloud, it's such a glorious sight. I understand how you feel. If somehow I could go, I wouldn't stay here. I'd take a ship and explore the universe and have the same wild adventures that Mal and Sharon have. I'd see R.R. Lyrae and Betelgeuse and Beta Cephei, but I can't. I'm earthbound, except in my imagination. And so are you. Come with me, Sam. Open the gate and pass through with me. You and Mal and I, you won't regret it. He gripped her shoulders hard. There is no gate. There never was. You haven't tried hard enough, Sam. Deep down, you must not want me to leave. Your will is keeping me here. Sam, please. There is no Kate, he whispered. She stared into his eyes for a long moment, unblinking, her lips set in a tight line before that compelling gaze. His hands fell away from her. Slowly, she rose to her feet. "I accept the compliment implied in your wish that I stay," she said quietly. In a swift, smooth motion, then, she turned and crossed the room. Before Haskell could move, she had opened the second dresser drawer and pulled out the revolver. She swung around to face him, the gun held behind her back, her free arm extended stiffly, the hand palm outward to fend him off. "Sharon, don't do anything rash. I will not stay, Sam. Let me find you help. People who will listen to you sympathetically. Will they send me back to my proper time and place in a propeller-driven aircraft? Sharon, put the gun down." Coolly, she pointed it at him. "Your will binds me here. If you refuse to break that will, I shall have to break it myself." There was no time to scream. The bullet engulfed his body in heat and blinding light. As he tumbled forward, his frozen eyes perceived one last instant of the world. Sharon, the gun slipping from her open fingers. She seemed insubstantial, transparent, fading. But the rest of everything was fading too. The darkness covered him before he hit the floor. He didn't even hear the gun strike near his hand. You've been listening to pre-1990s speculative fiction readings with a highlight on science fiction by Darrell T. Smith II. Please consider clicking the donation link in the description box. Thank you so much for your time and your imagination.